Every now and then I'll get comments under my videos along the lines of, why are you talking about X, whatever? When your own country's falling apart, your own government is increasingly fascist, why don't you talk about that? Eh? And my answer to that is generally because it doesn't seem to be true. But there is a group of people, and by all accounts a growing group of people, who believe that it very much is true. They are mostly on the political right, one might suggest largely on the populist right, and they are apparently extremely online, especially on places like Twitter. And their view of Britain borders on the apocalyptic. The United Kingdom is collapsing right now, they say. There's anger and civil unrest in the streets. We're facing a collapse of the United Kingdom economically, culturally, constitutionally, democratically. An existential threat at every level. And you regularly see posts like this one from Inevitable West, claiming that a satirical advert by Coinbase poking fun at Britain has been banned in the UK as an act of censorship. The UK is under a dictatorship, he concludes. Those of you who have watched my videos much in recent months will recall that I talk about what I must get around to calling Mallen's Law, which is that almost always when you see a post like this, the text purporting to give you the context for what you see in the photo or the video is lying to you. So it is here. The advert was rejected by the regulators, but for failing basic standards because it didn't include required risk disclosures that are required of financial products. That doesn't mean some people didn't criticise the ad for its aggressive anti-Britain take, but that's not why it was rejected by regulators who don't have the power anyway to ban adverts for content. That's the Advertising Standards Authority, which also did not ban this. But it's typical of the pattern. So here's another one, for instance. Some rando passenger on the London tube drops his trousers, and rather than just posting it and saying, here's a wacky thing that happened on the trip onto work today, instead it's posted by the sort of person who posts this stuff all the time with the message, London is so over, which is the flavour of the hyperbole. Another one, schoolgirl arrested because she entered a McDonald's after 5 p.m. The UK is a police state. Well, no, schoolgirl arrested because she assaulted police officers who had been called because she was causing a disturbance in the restaurant, abusing staff members. Also, obviously not current because it's for school holidays in the UK. It is actually several years old. Here's one by Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, whose regular message is that Britain is lawless. Literally, that's his slogan. And as he makes clear in this post, the reason is all those illegal immigrants arriving by boat into the country. Breaking news, he says, which is an immediate red flag in my experience. Illegal migrants can be heard shouting Allah Akbar as they invade our country. These men will now be free to roam our streets thanks to Keir Starmer. This is a national security emergency. And of course, Mallen's rule applies, because the footage is actually from 2015 and it shows refugees shouting Allah Akbar when they arrive after having crossed the Aegean Sea and arrived in Greece. Now, of course, Allah Akbar, God is great, is the sort of thing you might well shout when you just survived a precarious, dangerous journey. As a phrase, it's not copyrighted or even distinctive to people carrying out terrorist acts, even if it were otherwise. Not obvious what Keir Starmer was supposed to do about it in Greece in 2015. Now, you might be asking yourself, since we know that boats do actually arrive on the British coast, why would Nigel Farage be posting up fake videos and claiming them to be such? And it's because the outrage machine has to keep being fed. When you talk to extremely online people who have become persuaded that Britain's falling apart, it's because of two factors. One, they keep seeing things that they are told are terrible transgressions, and they see them over and over again. Sometimes they're the same things that they see over and over again, but obviously it's good if they can be claimed to be new things, and especially current, just happened things. Hence, breaking news, albeit with old footage out of context. The repetition means that they conclude that these events are frequent, ubiquitous, daily even. And two, because the narrative paints all of these events in apocalyptic terms, upping the dramatic meaning behind what are actually usually highly unusual and isolated cases. So, for example, a shopkeeper in Wrexham puts up a sign saying, "Due to scumbag shoplifting," and then a couple of local police get a bit overzealous and foolish and tell him to remove a sign because it might offend someone. That is recent, actually, and it was a genuinely dumb thing to do on their part. But my, how quickly it escalates on social media. When protecting criminals' feelings matters more than protecting the public from crime, you know free speech in Britain is in trouble. The police are out of control. Great Britain has flushed itself down the toilet. As opposed to Wrexham police officers embarrass themselves by overreacting and asking for a sign to be replaced, and they provoke criticism online. Before you know it, you're getting op-eds in the mainstream media like this one. "Is Britain falling apart?" with a suitably apocalyptic photo with it of a scene that is almost never seen in Britain. Now, around this time, someone will be chiming in, "So, you think Britain's perfect, do you?" Of course, the answer to that is no. There are lots of real problems in the UK, as there are everywhere else. Some of those problems are serious and need getting to grips with. The prisons are full, for example, the courts are ridiculously overloaded, and as a result the justice system is just creaking at the edges under huge pressure. There is a cost of living challenge that many people are finding immensely difficult, and expectations of what the government should or could be doing about it and what said government ever could be doing about it are arguably seriously mismatched. The National Health Service is in need of reform. The system of government generally is bloated and too slow to actually get stuff done. And many more. Some serious, some less so, but nevertheless many more problems. Not quite as bad as I remember when I was growing up in the 1970s and the 1980s, though, where we saw riots and terrorist bombings and major strikes, including the miners' strikes, the bin men strikes with piles of rubbish high on the streets across the country, serious stagflation and economic decline, rocketing unemployment and poverty. Not as bad as those times yet, but some of the same tunes are certainly being played. Of course, Britain didn't collapse then either, and there were good things as well as bad, just like there are today. But that's not what's being sold. We're being given apocalyptic messages because various people are trying to sell us something, i.e. populism. And because also in the social media age, you don't really go viral with less than apocalypse level messaging these days. And yet the fact is that Britain is not as bad as painted if you look at the data. Former editor of the right-wing Spectator magazine, Fraser Nelson, outraged a lot of populists last weekend with an article in the Times of London, where he pushed back against the violent, lawless, broken Britain narrative. So this is not some lefty writing in The Guardian. The Spectator has had a fair share of populist-adjacent content over the years, while Fraser Nelson was the editor. But Nelson does at least think that the data have to match up to the message, and he writes this: "Poll after poll finds the public convinced that crime is getting far worse and ready to believe Nigel Farage's summer campaign about lawless Britain." NHS hospital data shows knife assaults last year fell to a 25-year low, with the number treated for violent assault close to half what it was in 2000. Crime surveys agree. By such measures, our streets have seldom, if ever, been safer. So, what's going on? And he gets to another bit with the next paragraph. The answer is not just about crime, but about the way social media now acts as a distorting lens through which millions see their country. When shrill voices dominate, hyperbole wins, and Britain is portrayed not just as troubled, but in ruins, terrorised by immigrant-driven crime, even close to civil war. And if the official figures show none of this, well, then those figures must be wrong. And he gives the example of knife crime in Britain. 91% of Reform UK supporters assume it's gone up. A majority of all party supporters agree to some degree, but actual figures show that it has declined significantly. But he also takes multiple other measures to ensure that it's not just one cherry-picked rogue measure. So like admissions to NHS hospitals as a result of assault. Similarly, significant decline in figures. What about the proposition that it's all these immigrants that are driving crime? Well, that doesn't mean that it never happens, but the statistics don't support any kind of correlation. Here we see crime on a downward trend, the immigrant population on an upward trend. Of course, there are issues with uncontrolled immigration, and all parties are now recognising that. There are issues with putting groups of single young immigrant men all together in hotels in the middle of communities. Doesn't mean there aren't some graphs as well with lines that are going up. Sexual violence has risen, shoplifting has become a growing problem, as has snatching phones in the street. But the point is that they are normal issues, solvable issues. And if they're not being solved currently, then yes, that should be highlighted. People should be pressured or shamed until they're solved. I can't think of a time in history where there weren't issues in that situation. So it's perfectly possible for Farage or anyone else to campaign on such themes while still sticking to real problems. But if that was the issue, then why are most of the posts on these subjects online showing fake stuff? Fake crossings of the channel because they had some footage that could be misrepresented as much more menacing than the accurate ones. Fake concern for violence against women and girls when a perpetrator can be portrayed as being an immigrant, whereas almost zero interest when a perpetrator turns out to be English. When a message is being spread by deliberate disinformation intended to cause outrage over rare exceptions to the rule, then it says something about the weakness of the case behind the people doing the posting. Because just causes can be supported and are best supported by the truth. So take all the stuff about freedom of speech in the UK. Ooh, in the UK you can be jailed for posting a meme on social media. Can't be anyone who hasn't heard that by now. Well, on the one hand, they'll tell you that there's a study that says 30 people are jailed every single day for posting something online, which sounds pretty shocking and draconian, yes? And on the other hand, when you ask for examples of this, the ones that you actually get quoted can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Lucy Connolly often comes up, jailed for 31 months for posting something online. It's never mentioned that her post was actually encouraging people to set fire to hotels that have asylum seekers living in them. And this was posted as riots were taking place, where at least one group tried to set fire to such a hotel. So yes, that's inciting racial hatred and actual violence. Not just, posting a witty cartoon or something. So the fact that hers is the case, that is often quoted, just minus that important context, tells you that this is relatively unusual. Because if it was that frequent, you wouldn't be able to remember any of the names. There would be so many of them. A review of that 30 people a day figure found that the vast majority of those were things like online harassment and death threats aimed at individuals. So yes, online content, but none of those get spread by extremely online people as examples of their grievances because they are unequivocally despicable actions by vile people. And again, does that mean there are never free speech issues in Britain? No, there are issues we could discuss. I'm just not going to put them into a discussion about whether Britain is becoming fascist and civil war is on the horizon and blah, 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 because that's a framing for the discussion that is simply nonsense. It is infantilizing. Serious issues should be discussed seriously, as though by grown-ups. And look, I'm consistent about this. I did a video talking about how you know if you are actually in a serious moment of democratic decline. And the factors in that video I discussed are nowhere near the precarious state in the UK that they are in America, and most of them are not declining. Now, of course, what the populists hope is that by campaigning on this stuff, spreading the disinformation, reinforced with the innuendo, they will continue to radicalise enough of the British population that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Britain will break down because a majority swallowed the line that it was on the verge of breaking down, and because more and more of them came to see that such a breakdown was not only inevitable but desirable, a means to an end. All I can say is that if in trying to get your party elected, you want to turn Britain into the politically polarised cesspool that the United States has become, just because Trump showed you how to use that to get over the line, well, we have very different visions for what is in this country's best interests. It's a shame, because there will be some serious existential questions that we have to confront in the coming decade. They probably will take more radicalism than recent governments have proven capable of. And some of the other problems do need grasping pretty urgently, something that seems not to be happening right now and could do with some effective campaigning. But the recipe of stirring up outrage and hatred, coming in then with promises of easy answers based on just blaming immigrants for all the problems, that is not remotely going to get close to what we need to address those problems. All too often in politics, when you get to this point, people shrug their shoulders and say, well, yes, I hear what you say, but something must be done. It's the most powerful and yet the dumbest rationale. Something must be done. This is something, therefore this must be done. Well, as Trump's America is teaching the world, it is entirely possible that the something that gets done makes things a lot worse, not better.